These are 5 reasons 911 dispatchers are first responders and why it matters. I'm Drew. I started as a 911 dispatcher. I spent a couple decades as a law enforcement officer. I ended my career as a law enforcement administrator over a 911 center. Enough about me. What if I told you the first responder to every emergency isn't on the street? It's not a cop, it's not a firefighter, it's not a paramedic. It's a voice on the other end of a phone.
A little after 11 p.m. this evening, we get a frantic 911 call. From a mother who tells our dispatcher that her son just shot his father, her husband. During the exchange of communication, this dispatcher can hear more gunfire in the background. Our deputies get here within 3 minutes.
But here's the problem. In most places across the US, 911 dispatchers aren't even classified as first responders. Instead, they're considered clerical staff, much like the executive's assistant or the payroll people or the radio maintenance people. Does that sound right to you? Today, we're breaking down the top 5 reasons why emergency telecommunicators are first responders and why they must be recognized as such. If you're a cop, if you're a firefighter, if you're a medic, or even a politician, or just somebody who's ever called 911, this video is for you. I'd love for you to stick around to the end because we're gonna be deep diving into the real life examples and the legislation that could change the whole thing. All right, let's get into it. Reason number 1, dispatchers experience the exact same trauma. Dispatchers hear every single second of somebody's worst moment. They don't get to look away, they don't get to forget, and as a matter of fact, they can't reach through the phone and help somebody.
This dispatcher can hear more gunfire in the background.
It's a very helpless feeling. They live with the last words of a dying child. They hear the sounds of gunshots when somebody takes themselves out of this world. They hear the screams of domestic violence victims.
Comm 911, what is the address of your emergency?
Do we get an officer right away, please? My husband just shot himself.
Okay, what's the address?
He's trying to kill us. 1-1.
Okay.
Stop!
Okay, ma'am.
And they don't get closure. Unlike police, fire, and EMS who actually see the outcome of their efforts, they rarely find out if the person they tried to save lived or died. Now, if that's not frontline exposure to trauma, what is? I understand there's a difference between acute danger and long-term trauma, but the long-term trauma is the exact same. Would we ever tell a police officer or a firefighter that the trauma that they face is just clerical work? Here's reason number 2. 911 dispatchers make life or death decisions. Doing CPR instructions over the phone is a great example.
Listen to me. All right, I want you to place the heel of your hand. Okay, right between his chest, right between his breastbones.
Yes.
Put your other hand on top of that hand.
Yes.
We want to pump his chest to me hard and fast, going to this twice per second.
I'm doing it again.
Okay, no, just keep on pumping. That's all you need to do for me. Keep on pumping his chest for me. I don't need you to stop and talk or anything. I just want you to count out loud for me.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
That's a dispatcher telling a domestic violence victim how to hide from their attacker.
The door, I'm in here.
Are you able to go upstairs away from the front door?
Oh my God, he's shooting at my door. He's shooting at my door.
Can you go upstairs?
No, I can't go anywhere. He's shooting in the door. He's shooting the door up.
Get away from
He's shooting the door up.
Can you get away from the front door?
I'm in the
Can you go
bedroom, but
another
if he comes in here, he lost it.
Okay, you said he's shooting. Are you able to get away from the front
door? He's shooting in the door. He's probably, oh my, no, woo! He wants.
Again, dispatcher. Deciding which officer or firefighter gets sent to a chaotic fire scene first, that's a dispatcher. You know what? When there's a chaotic crash, the 911 keeps going and going and going until emergency people arrive. It doesn't stop. Sometimes there's only 2 or 3 people working. And they never get to see the scene. So the wrong decision could send an officer into an ambush. The right decision can save a life before anybody even arrives if they're giving pre-arrival instructions. So let me ask you again. If a firefighter tells you to stay low in a fire, they're a first responder. If a medic tells you how to stop the bleeding, they're a first responder. So why is a dispatcher giving CPR instructions over the phone not a first responder? Moving on to reason 3. Dispatchers work in a very high stress and very intense environment. There's no question about it. Most people think a 911 is just a number that you call, and they don't understand why they're being asked the questions that they're being asked. But the 911 operators have been through it thousands of times, sometimes in a day. So rapid fire emergencies coming in and all at once, a multi-car crash, a structure fire, an active shooter. If they make mistakes, they're the top story in the headlines and they're viral. Sometimes even our own dispatchers make them go viral. So if a SWAT officer keeping his cool under pressure is a first responder, why isn't a dispatcher who does the exact same thing, but over a phone? It's a little different because obviously the SWAT guy can take a life, but a dispatcher can save a life. Moving on to reason 4, states are already starting to recognize dispatchers as first responders. Here's the good news. Change is already starting to happen. There are a number of states that have already passed laws recognizing 911 telecommunicators as first responders. There are also bills currently in progress in a few more states. There are even agencies that get down to the agency level that have decided to call their 911 emergency dispatchers first responders, but it's just not enough. There are staffing shortages. They force dispatchers to work mandatory overtime, sometimes 16-hour shifts, sometimes back-to-back. So as a result, burnout skyrockets, it causes high turnover, and that turnover forces agencies to spend more taxpayer dollars to recruit, train, and retain those replacements. Every time a dispatcher quits, it costs taxpayers like a couple $1,000s just to replace them. Background checks, application process, interview boards. Then training a new 911 professional isn't cheap either, because now you're taking somebody off the floor to train those people or that person. It takes months, sometimes even years, for them to get to the level where they can handle life or death calls. And here's the kicker. We wouldn't need to replace them often if we simply treated them as first responders, if we paid them fairly, if we gave them mental health resources they deserve, if they bumped up their retirement to make it a little more comparable to the first responders. So reason number 5, classification matters for funding, for support, for survival. When dispatchers aren't recognized as first responders, they get less funding for training and equipment. They're the forgotten few sometimes. The paint color is the same. It's been the same for 30 years sometimes. They have higher burnout and suicide rates. They get ignored when mental health resources are allocated to first responders and get overlooked in critical incident stress debriefings sometimes. So how much longer are we going to let that happen? This is a do unto others profession. Why wouldn't we want to do unto them as we wish them to do unto us? So here's what you can do right now. Number 1, if you're a first responder, you can advocate for your dispatchers. You wouldn't last a shift without them. I know you appreciate them for the most part. Get up there and talk to them and say hi, but get out there and advocate for them. Why wouldn't you fight for them the way that you fight for each other? And if you're an agency leader, number 2, push for this reclassification. It's a business decision, if anything else. You need a well-adjusted dispatcher answering your phones. They're the face of the agency, though people don't see their faces. And if you're a politician, number 3, please do your job. Push the legislation. Let's fix this. Let's make it right for them. Let's retain these people in the field. They're very giving and resourceful souls, and they've saved countless lives without recognition. I am very curious to what you think about this. Are dispatchers first responders? Should they be considered first responders? Leave me a comment. Let's start the discussion, but let's do it in a healthy way. There's been some recent controversies in the profession, and the term rocket scientist came out to be associated with, well, it's not rocket science. Let me tell you, when the rocket scientists have an emergency, they freeze and panic. They don't know what to do. So they pick up the phone and they call 911. Who do you think handles that? Leave your comments below. I'm Drew Breasy. I'm part of the Comm Center. On behalf of my podcast partner, John, who's an active 911 dispatcher, we want you to take care of one another. And remember, every good case starts with a 911 call.